Pepsi making headlines for their new controversial commercial, plus what Martin Luther King's daughter and others have to say. We'll talk about what this means for the media when it comes to these social movements. All of that and more in this sit-down interview with Longwood's Director of Citizen Leadership and Social Justice Education. This is Autumn Childress. Well, Mr. Page, thank you for being with us today. The purpose of this conversation was to talk about the Pepsi commercial that has created a dialogue everywhere. So just to keep everyone up to speed, we're going to go ahead and watch the commercial.
Great. So what's really interesting when we look at the signage, you have one saying, join the conversation. Well, that's great. Which conversation are we joining?
Right.
It would have been so much more effective had they put real social justice issues in the signage.
And I mean, even just in the crowd, you can see that Pepsi was trying to offer this idea of diversity.
Absolutely. So we certainly see that with the Muslim woman wearing the hijab. We certainly see that towards the end, where it looks like you have members of the LGBTQ plus community who are there. So there are moments, but you can't help but to say they seem just sort of inauthentic. They're just falsely placed there for a reason. But even the choice of music, again, joining in the conversation, jumping in, again, powerful rallying music. It could have been so much more. It just fell short of the mark. And then, of course, you have, I've never been to a protest where people just sort of broke out into spontaneous dance, this way.
Right. The overall mood just seems happy, which is not what you see at these protests, specifically Black Lives Matter protests.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the inauthenticity of it. That's where you see people making a mockery of it.
Right.
Absolutely. And even in that moment where she strips herself of the wig and wipes off the lipstick, it's that moment of, okay, I've been a part of the system and now I want to be a part of the solution. It was a moment. Something could have transpired from that, but it just, again, it falls short.
And of course, this is the part that has caused outrage everywhere.
Right. So again, mission accomplished. We came, we gave a cop a Pepsi, and now everyone's happy. We can go home because we've achieved peace and harmony.
Right. So after watching that, I just want to get your immediate reactions, because since being aired, Pepsi has removed the commercial. People have called it tone deaf, saying that it trivialized social justice movements. So what are just your immediate reactions?
Well, I can totally understand the response of being tone deaf. I would even take it a step further to say that it's just completely out of touch. That, I'm still puzzled to this day how, when it went through, the production, through the reviews, how someone said, yeah, that's okay, let's go ahead and send that out for public airing and consumption. Because absolutely what it does is it totally misunderstands what the whole protest movement has been about, particularly the Black Lives Matter movement. And I've heard many people say that it trivializes the movement, and really I think that it really shows just how insensitive Pepsi was with this whole commercialization, because what they really did is they commodified or they commercialized your real life and death struggle to say, let's put a product placement because we want to sell more Pepsi. So that for me was really the most disturbing piece.
So do you think Pepsi was trying to send a message, or were they really just this oblivious to the idea of social justice movements?
I think that's really a great question, because I would like to believe in my heart of hearts that there was no evil intent, that there was no malice that said we're going to take advantage. I actually believe that they thought that this particular ad was going to, really tout harmony and peace, and coming together, again, living louder, living for today. I actually think that they believed that they had their finger on the pulse of what was going on. But in actuality, when you see the individuals, the identities that were sort of personified, in the piece, they really missed the mark. And, I'm a product of the 70s. I grew up in the 70s. So I'm reminded of that, very iconic 1970s Coca-Cola commercial, that I'd like to teach the world to sing,
Right.
In perfect harmony, where you had visible diversity. So I'd like to believe that Pepsi was trying to tap into that. They just missed the mark.
Right. And so I wanted to talk a lot about social media because as soon as the commercial was revealed, social media was taken by storm.
Sure.
But there were a few that I wanted to focus on that really kind of hit home for me because it was like, wow, Pepsi is making this kind of impact based off this one commercial. So Taryn Finley, she wrote, "Could you be any more blatant with the disrespect and appropriation of a movement at Pepsi? Is this a sick joke?" And the picture that was associated with the tweet was Kendall Jenner handing the Pepsi to the police officer. But then another famous picture was a black female going up to the police, and they were just kind of staring at her.
So basically, that's the iconic image of Aisha Evans from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in July. And what you fail to see is that the police actually, charged at her, and then she was physically arrested, and she was protesting after the shooting of Alton Sterling. And so, you have this image in the Pepsi commercial of, Kylie Jenner coming in and giving the police officer the Pepsi, and then there's that moment's hesitation where the music stops. Everyone's waiting with bated breath to see the response of the police officer, and then when he willingly accepts it and smiles, hey, everything is great, we're going to cheer, we're going to be happy, and now the protest is over.
Right.
But when we look at it, just the whole commercial itself, as it talked about the movement. I've been to many protests in my life, many demonstrations, and I have never seen people go in with that level of happiness, of joy. We're going to clap, we're going to smile, we're going to glad hand. People go in because they're frustrated, they're angry, they really want to express how they feel, but there's never that sense of joy. Usually there's that a sense of foreboding because there's always a danger in a protest that you never know what's going to happen. There's that feeling of dread, there's the frustration that's all pent up, but you didn't see any of that, in this particular commercial, which again, was an opportunity to really make a statement. They again just missed the mark.
Yep. Another tweet that I wanted to talk about was Z-Way. She tweeted, "And to think, all Rodney King needed to avoid that beating was a Pepsi." And then Bernice King, which has gotten the most reaction on Twitter, Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter, she tweeted, "If only Daddy would have known about the power of hashtag Pepsi," with a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. Being manhandled by the police. So just to think that Pepsi, and in the same sentence as Martin Luther King Jr. and Rodney King, how is that even possible?
Right, just think how things would have been different on the Edmund Pettus Bridge had everyone had been in possession of a Pepsi that day. Again, it does in a sense trivialize, but I think it really demeans the movement because again, these are real people. This is a real lived experience. And what we're doing even with the generic protest signs with peace and love, okay, peace and love are great, but when you have, people who are, concerned about, income disparity, when they're concerned with crime, when they're concerned with, lack of housing, when they're concerned with, disenfranchisement with voting rights and things of that nature, peace and love are really not high on that list of priority, and so again, missed opportunity.
Right. And so that brings me to kind of our bigger issue topic. What is the representation or misrepresentation of these social justice issues and movements in the media? And how do you think that we should just go about handling them?
Well, I think that's really the million-dollar question. When you look at the difference between social media's handling of a lot of the social justice issues versus sort of mainstream media, when we think of how, again, crime and drugs and poverty and inequality are shown sort of in mainstream media, there's usually a particular face that's associated with it. And historically, it's been the face of sort of black and brown people. That when you think of poverty, you think immediately inner city. When you think of drugs, you immediately think, inner city. When you start to think crime, you start to think again, inner city. And when you do that, that is the overwhelming narrative, it really starts to plant the seed that the problem's not ours, the problem is theirs. And it sets up this sort of us versus them dichotomy. And so therefore, when you see rioting, that's going on, when there's, civil unrest, when people are, really advocating for, equality and to look into issues, it really sets up that, well, it doesn't happen here, it's only with them.
Right.
Whereas now you have social media taking over where people really are establishing their own messages. They're not waiting for, mainstream media news outlets to say, this is what's really going on. They're showing it grassroots, boots on the ground. I'm here. This is it. It's not going into, any kind of post-production room. We're not going to cut it. We're not going to show a little snippet, of this. We're actually going to show the raw footage and let people decide for themselves. So I think that's really been the benefit of social media, is it's really putting out there for, popular consumption, what's literally happening, in the streets. So I think that's really the larger piece that we need to start to look at, is why are we so fearful to engage in these real world conversations about what's going on, in our communities.
Well, thank you for your expertise. Thank you for being here and sharing all of that knowledge with us. And thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.